Thank you, Venerable Wu Ping. And for those of us who probably engaged in this for the very first time, did you enjoy it? Did you get something out of it? Because it is a different way. Meditation, of course, is across the faiths, and it's always interesting to see how other faiths do something which we ourselves in our own particular faith do perhaps in a particular way. So it's good to be able to experience something different. And I think both Venerable Wu Ping and Venerable Wu Tong for showing us that form of walking meditation. Right now we're going to engage in another dimension. The next title of the next session is Heart to Heart, Interfaith Dialogue, Ways of Celebrating Our Common Ground and Valuing Our Differences. And Trish, who's a member of St. Teresa's Parish here in Toowoomba and has certainly been very much part of today's proceedings, is going to lead us through for the next little while. So would you please welcome Trish to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm rather glad that we just had meditation because I've been meditating for about 40 years, off and on, although my daughters often say you've been avoiding meditation for about 40 years. But I've always found it actually centres me and calms me a little. And I remember too a writer and a speaker who's very dear to my sort of way of thinking, and that's Thich Nhat Hanh, another Buddhist, who said, if you want peace, then be peace. And I think walking meditation of any kind actually helps us to achieve that peace. And I think the more you do it, when you actually engage in dialogue, that practice of meditation actually helps you to be more open to the other, more open to the person with whom you're dialoguing. Now, before I begin, I'd just like to give you a brief outline of the structure of my session. Unfortunately, everyone else had very short sessions, and I've taken this on at the last moment. So initially it was going to be a communication exercise, and another person was doing that. So I'm standing in for them because they had something happen that they were not able to come. So I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about my life story in terms of my experience of interfaith dialogue and engagement. I'll also look at some of the things that can be a barrier to effective engagement. And finally, I'll look at some strategies or guidelines that we can implement when we're actually engaged in dialogue. I was rather interested in this title in this forum's title, when I first saw it advertised as, in some ways, to express something of my life journey. Now, before I even knew the word existed, my family story and childhood gave me an experience of ecumenism, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But certainly in my family, in my extended family, there are people from all different religious traditions. The predominant ones would be Catholic, Presbyterian, Anglican. There's also Seventh-day Adventists. There's a Buddhist. So there's a range of, but in terms of the Christian tradition, we have lots of different members of the different Christian churches, but we're all the one family, so we get together at funerals, occasionally at Christmas. So we're just used to all being one family, although we come from different Christian traditions. Then in my early adult life, I had my first experience of interfaith dialogue, although I wouldn't have called it that at the time. This was through conversations with housemates and friends from different countries and religions. And a feature of many of these conversations was finding out that there was so much that united us, despite our obvious differences, not least our shared humanity. Now, I think it's a good thing before I start is to say what I believe interfaith dialogue is. And I think the first place to start there is to look at what the word dialogue means. It comes from the Greek dia or dia, meaning through, and logos, meaning word or meaning. So you get meaning through words. So where understandings can emerge that might not have been present before we engaged. Dialogue's done in a spirit of inquiry, a wanting to know. Perhaps that colloquial expression, having a heart-to-heart, is a good descriptor. And that's why I've taken that title from my talk, Interfaith Dialogue, heart-to-heart. People talking together, really being present to each other, connecting with each other. Unfortunately, many of us haven't been taught those skills of listening and speaking to each other in a spirit of dialogue. So often our dialogues are a whole series of monologues. I'll have my say, you'll have your say, and we're not always engaged in listening to the other. I mean, have you ever been in a conversation with someone and while they're still talking, you're thinking of what you're going to say next? That's not dialogue. And I must admit I fall into that trap too sometimes. Often too, what we think of as dialogue is actually discussion. I mean, you look at discussion, at its original Latin root, it kind of means to shake up or to break up something. We pull things apart in discussion. Now, there's nothing wrong with discussion. It has a real role to play, even in interfaith communication and engagement. But generally, when we're talking about dialogue, it's not discussion. And so we need to be aware of what kind of conversation are we having in this situation. And if it's dialogue, let's leave the judgment, the analysis to one side and just be present to the other. So keeping this meaning of dialogue in mind, how do we define interfaith dialogue? Now, you get lots of very formal definitions. One says it's a cooperative and positive interaction between people of different religious traditions or faiths at both the individual and institutional level. Each party remains true to their own beliefs while respecting the right of other people to practice their faith freely. In other words, it's about people of different faiths coming together to a mutual understanding and respect that allows them to live and cooperate with each other in spite of the differences and because of their shared humanity. So we always start from the position of our own faith, and through dialogue, through conversation, we come to a meeting of hearts. As Pope Francis said last year, he was at an interfaith meeting in Sri Lanka, he said such dialogue will accentuate how varied our beliefs, traditions and practices are, but if we're honest in presenting our convictions and do this with love, we will be able to see more clearly what we hold in common. New avenues will be open for mutual esteem, cooperation and indeed friendship. So a little later I'll come back to considering some of those guidelines for interfaith dialogue that hopefully would lead to what Pope Francis was talking about. Now, one of the starting points for dialogue is sharing stories and allowing time for conversation with the other. Now, for instance, it might, if we were to do it today, it might include sharing some aspect of our why we came here today, or maybe how we came to be involved in interfaith dialogue in the first place, telling something of that sort of story. And so in the spirit of this storytelling, I'll tell you a little bit about my story and my engagement with interfaith dialogue. Now, spirituality and religion have been dominant factors in my adult life, both personally and in my career as a teacher. I've been teacher of study of religion for almost 20 years. I've worked with adults in that area. I've been involved in meditation groups and other sorts of things, and of course over the years I've had lots of experience of people from other nations, other cultures and other religions. My interest in comparative religion, particularly exploring the differences and commonalities to be found in different Christian denominations and in the major religions of the world, has been an interest and fascination since I was quite young. Now, my mother was what was called a mixed marriage. Her father was from an Irish Catholic background and her mother from a Scottish Presbyterian family. And their marriage at the beginning of the First World War was a time and place where religious sectarianism was rife. Yet they both remained faithful to their own respective religious traditions and have found a way of accommodating their differences and finding common ground although, as my mother said, as having been a child of such a union, not without their heated discussions at times. They both participated in the social life of their respective churches. Now, my mother may well have remained a Presbyterian until the end of her life, but in 1950, when she was only actually in her 50s, and 6 months before she died, her beloved Presbyterian minister and close family friend was dismissed from his post for his ecumenical views, views that were way before his time. And so in the last months of her life, feeling alienated from the hierarchy of her church, and in a sense still wanting a closer unity with her family, because all of those had been Catholic, she turned to her other church family and became a Catholic. What was really interesting was that after my grandmother's death, her Presbyterian women friends, who found her conversion to Catholicism somewhat puzzling, even despite they could understand some of the reasons why, they really continued to treat my grandfather as a close friend. And in his retirement years, when he became very well known throughout Australia as a judge of gardens and floral art, they often invited him to teach them the finer points of flower arranging in Ikebana. Now, the religious differences remained, but they shared their common humanity, their faith in God, and their memories of my grandmother. Now, from an early age, my own parents ensured that we learnt from my mother's upbringing that religion should not be a source of division, that whilst we might have different beliefs and practices, there were many things we held in common, and we were all striving to be the best we could be. And above all, God loved us equally, whoever we are, whatever religion we were, or none. Although I must admit not all of my teachers agreed with that, and I often wonder what they would have thought of the statement that came out of Vatican II, that the Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these other religions, that she has a high regard for their manner of life and conduct, their precepts and doctrines. Now, my childhood experiences stood me in good stead as I moved out of home and made my own way in the world. As a young teacher, I shared a house with a Polish girl and 3 Chinese students, female students. 2 of these students were Catholic and 1 Buddhist, 1 from Malaysia, another from Hong Kong, and 1 from Singapore. We were all members of the Catholic Asian Students Society, or CAS as it was known. Now, not all of us were Asian, and my Polish housemate and I were not the only exceptions, nor were all of us Catholic. In fact, I had a Chinese boyfriend for nearly 12 months, whom I met at CAS, and he was from Indonesia and a Buddhist. So it wasn't just, it was fairly inclusive sort of group. Most of us, and every group has people who can't interact in a spirit of openness, but most of us were able to interact in a spirit of openness and respect for each other as human beings. Religion, race and nationality were generally not a problem. There were moments, but generally not a problem. I think how fortunate I was to have had that experience, as like my childhood experience had coloured my understanding of what was possible in connecting with people of other faiths and whose worldview was different to my own. I must admit in CAST we had a few members who would definitely consider themselves atheists, so it really was a fairly embracing sort of group. Now, this experience helped me to make sense of my struggle to make sense of life and to find my own meaning. Now, in the years since, through my travel, my work and places I've lived, I've met people of many different religions and shared their friendship and aspects of their lives. Now, each encounter has led me to study more about their beliefs, and so doing I discovered a lot more about my own. From Buddhism, at a time when I wasn't sure what I believed, I learnt meditation and the gift of living mindfully, and then discovered the hidden treasure of mindfulness, meditation and contemplation in my own faith tradition. In more recent years, I have to thank a wonderful young woman from Taiwan, a Buddhist, whom I taught at St Ursula's in years 11 and 12, because she taught me how to know at heart level what I'd always known at head level, or for many years I'd known as head level. We were having a discussion about what was it that she had learnt in her 2 years at St Ursula's. And she said she'd learnt that the call to love was at the heart of Jesus' teaching and at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. It was at the heart of all religions. She also said to love isn't easy, but it was what made us human and what could unite us. When she left, she made me this little, it's actually meant to go on my phone, but anyway, I'm not a lover of mobile phones, although I have them. But she made this, and this was heart to heart, and that love was that foundation that made us human. I still keep that, it's on my desk. Every time I look at it, I'm not only reminded of her, but I'm reminded of that really powerful statement that she made. So she became the teacher and I became the student. A very powerful lesson. Now, for my study of Judaism, and I did study Judaism at the Australian Catholic University, and my teacher was Marion Apple, the wife of the then Chief Rabbi of Australia. And I also lived in Bondi, and most of the people in our street, by pure chance, happened to be either Catholic or Jewish. And from my study and from my Jewish neighbours, I learnt the importance of Sabbath rest, taking time out to be. I also learnt the power of family ritual in nurturing faith and hope over thousands of years, despite the vicissitudes of history. And in sharing Shabbat meals, I saw with my own eyes the strong Jewish link evident in Catholic ritual, especially the Eucharist. Now, Hinduism's gift was the understanding of the whole of creation as revelation of the holy, of God, giving me a much deeper and richer insight into the principle of sacramentality, which underpins so much of Catholicism, and today a much richer understanding of the whole environmental movement as well, and the care for the earth as part of our whole care of all that is. As well, through their commitment to Salat and their constant gratitude for Allah's good gifts, my Muslim friends taught me the importance of commitment to my own prayer life and an attitude of gratefulness for whatever life brings as a foundation for happiness. I particularly remember with great fondness our local corner shop owner in North Bondi. He was one of the key members of the Lakemba Mosque, and he was a man of deep faith, of moderate views, and wonderful openness to people of all religions. As well, he had an infectious gratitude for the little gifts that came with each day, and in this way he impacted on all of those who came into his store. Most importantly, he and his family members' diligence and discipline in meeting their prayer obligations, and sometimes if one of the girls who worked in the store wasn't Muslim, and the curtains would blow into the lounge room and they would be praying. So you actually saw them on rare occasions actually praying in the middle of time for prayer. I don't think I would probably be as faithful as they were, but it certainly gave me a renewed purpose in persevering with my own prayer life and the discipline that requires. And finally, from the first peoples of this land, our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, and the Aboriginal people that I've worked with, I learnt the gift of Dadiri. A really wonderful Indigenous woman called Miriam Rose Ungame Bauman opened my eyes to this great gift. As she explains, Dadiri is inner, deep listening and quiet, still awareness. There's no need to reflect or do too much, or to do a lot of thinking. It's just being aware, being present to the deep spring that's inside us. It's what we call today in our Catholic tradition contemplation. Learning about this took me full circle and brought me back to the Zen meditation I learned all those years ago when I first set out on my journey of faith, my search for meaning. Now, of course, none of these insights came easily. Life's always a gradual process, and we need to respect the pace of the moment. The seed is planted, and then it needs time to grow. And this applies particularly to dialogue and to interfaith dialogue. Now, along the way, my ignorance of other faiths more than once led me to give offence. And of course, some of the people I met made similar mistakes with me. Fortunately, when we were able to respect each other's humanity, there was always the possibility that we could rebuild trust and start again. Some of them were actually quite humorous things. when I was living in London, an American friend wanted to introduce me to the wonders of Eastern European kosher cooking, and took me to what was a very famous restaurant in London at the time, Bloom's. I think it's since closed, because I know when we were in London in 2007, I was interested in going. Someone said, oh no, they moved since you were here, and now they've closed recently, so I don't know. It was also known for its rather snooty waiters who could make life difficult. So we came quite late and had lunch, and it was a very lovely lunch. It was a bit like the Jewish version of corned meat without the white sauce, vegetables, and we had a lovely soup to start off with. And when came dessert, I ordered apple strudel. I was rather a fan of apple strudel in those days. And an apple strudel duly came. And a table across from me, a couple of ladies had come in late, and obviously come in early for afternoon tea, and we'd come in late for lunch. And they brought my strudel out and put it in front of me, and she also ordered strudel. It was this lovely mound of cream and ice cream on hers. And so I beckoned the waiter over and said, excuse me, sir. I said, why haven't you put some cream and ice cream? I would like some, please. He looked down his nose at me and said, Madam, this is a kosher restaurant. He said, you had a meaty meal, no milk for you. Later on, I discovered you don't mix meat and milk in meals in a kosher household. My American friend told the story for months after to anyone who would have the patience to listen. And she, of course, coming from a part of the States where there are a lot of Jewish families, she wasn't Jewish herself, was well aware of the rules and just let me fall into the trap. But there's other ways too that we can often give offence. I know religion gets a really bad press today, especially from those who think it's irrelevant, that science has all the answers. But there is at the same time a unique movement universally towards dialogue between the world religions. And readers of many of these religions and ordinary people at the grassroots level are coming to pray together, to dialogue, to find common ground and to value each other's difference. Now, your presence here today is witness to your desire to contribute to this dialogue and help foster peace and harmony among people and religions, not just here, but around the world. Now, one of my teachers many years ago gave me some wise advice. If you want to change the world, start with yourself. Then act locally in your own sphere of influence, and the rest will follow like ripples in a pond. So let's start with ourselves. What do we need to do to engage effectively in interfaith dialogue? Well, first of all, we need to know ourselves and know our own faith. And in the cases of people who don't belong to a religious tradition, know what you do believe. Know what gives meaning to you, what's important to you, the values you hold. We need to really clarify our own values and attitudes about our religious beliefs and recognise and appreciate the commonalities and differences within our own faith tradition. And we need to come to terms with some of the paradoxes, the questions and challenges we face in the active participation of our own faith. And there are many, and just because you belong to I'm a Catholic, and there are Catholics with all different sorts of understandings of a whole range of things, including core beliefs. And I have been in situations where people have not been at all accepting of my understanding of something or my view of something. And I must admit, sadly, that there have been times when I've been less than tolerant of others within my own tradition who have tried to hammer me with their views, and I sort of act negatively at times. I get frustrated or annoyed. Now, the second the thing is that if you do this, if you're aware of your own prejudices, if you know what your reactions are when you feel under threat, the more effective your dialogue will be with others. You'll suddenly sense that you're getting a bit defensive or whatever. Be aware of who you are and how you feel. And also in terms of knowing about your own faith, I think the more I learnt about my own faith, the more I could actually recognise what was common in other religious traditions. The great, the golden rule, it's just in so many religious traditions. I never realised when I was much younger that this was something that wasn't just pertinent to my faith, but it was present in all. I learned a lot more in recent years about the understanding of what my own faith teaches about the nature of God. And so now for me, the Buddhist understanding of nothingness or no-thingness which I found I couldn't sort of see any connection. I can see very strong links with that kind of concept in my own faith. The second thing is learn about other faiths. When we're going on a trip to a new country or a place we've never been to, we generally find out about it before we go there so that we can appreciate and understand better what we experience, what we see, and also to avoid some common pitfalls. In my adventurous youth, travelling around Europe in a combi van with 2 friends, we once decided on the spur of the moment, as you do when you're young, to catch a ferry from Bari in Italy across to Corfu in Greece. Now, it was a weekday, so of course you don't need to bother about getting any money. Why pay exorbitant rates at the Italian Bureau de Change for Greek drachmas when you're going to get a better deal when you get to Greece itself? Unfortunately, going off without any kind of research, we arrived on Greece's National Day of Independence, 25th of March, which was also a religious festival for them too, so it was doubly important. Public holiday, not a single thing was open. So all we had was Italian money. Thanks to the goodness of a couple that we met on the ferry, they paid our first night's fees at the campsite, and we had a tin of sardines and a very small bit of bread, knob of bread, a day-old bread. We didn't starve. We had to have cold showers. They ran by coin as well. So it wasn't really terrible, but it wasn't a good introduction to Greece. A little research might have helped us solve that issue. And the same is that when we engage in interfaith dialogue, we need to know a little bit, even just a little bit, about the other. Now, if we're not interested in finding out something, then we're starting off that dialogue, a little poorer than we need to. We can avoid also giving unnecessary offence if we have some knowledge. And as I discovered with my lack of knowledge about Jewish dietary laws, and of course, if we know nothing about different faiths, we can still. Now's the time to make a start. And if for the very first time you meet someone from another faith, and you've never known very much about other faiths, but quite inadvertently, or you bump into someone on a plane or a train, and you discover they're someone from a different faith, and you get talking, that's a start. The thing is to start is to listen. Listen with openness. I used to talk about my students with the five openings: the open mind, the open heart, the open ears, the open hands, and the open eyes. You read body language, you see what's happening, you listen with that open mind and that open heart. And the open hands. Your hands are like this. You can receive and you can give. You're not taking and you're not holding back. So that symbolically, that open hands. And I actually used to find it was easy if I just rested, when I'm talking, just rest my hands on my lap as I'm talking sometimes, because I tend to just wave my hands around a bit. Students used to take me off. You'd be very intently talking, and you'd look down the back and there's someone mirroring your actions. So I found that in dialogue it was often helpful just to rest hands like this. It's really, it's great to suspend judgment and just be present to the other, truly listening as they share what's so important in the fabric of their lives. And then you in turn can share what's important to you. And by stepping into their tradition and listening to what their faith means to them, you gain new insights, yes, as Pope Francis has said about them, and also that you find common ground despite the differences. But you also learn to look at your own tradition with new eyes. And that's something that I've definitely found to be true. And I spoke about that a little bit earlier. The third thing is honour the differences. Yes, we can look for where our common ground is, and that's important. But first, honour the differences. Difference is essential to all of life. From biology, we learnt that every ecosystem is dependent on its biodiversity, and the diversity of faiths is an extension of that concept. The trap of ignoring difference is something we need to take care to avoid in interfaith dialogue. When people discover my interest in comparative religions, I've often been asked whether, when you consider the essentials, if all religions are basically the same. Now, some of these people have been interested in religion and others highly critical of it. Now, certainly all religions share certain characteristics in common to a greater or lesser degree. They're complex of experiences, attitudes, ideas and emotions. They all have beliefs, rituals, practices, symbols, texts and institutional structures which enable us as individuals and social beings to identify and express and live out a most fundamental relationship with a source of meaning that both transcends and encompasses our life and our world. It's a source of meaning that provides a foundation for our common ground. So all world religions are not the same. They are very different in their paradigms, and these differences profoundly affect their identity. Each has come about at different places and times, in particular cultures with their own worldviews, and in many cases in response to a really powerful spiritual experience of their founder or founders. I mean, the same applies to Indigenous religions, except they tend to be much more localised. Like in Australia, there are many, many expressions of Aboriginal spirituality. There's not just one. And even in those religions that have diverged from another religion, as Christianity has from Judaism, Buddhism from Hinduism, and the Baha'i faith from Islam, there are major differences in beliefs and practices from their original source. And then a similar divergency between the two major expressions in Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana, in which Pure Land Buddhism is situated, and in Islam between the Shia and the Shiites. And they're not the only strands in Islam either, although they're the dominant ones. Now, this forum's not the time to go into these differences, but really understanding how religious traditions can be internally varied and diverse can help us avoid overgeneralisations or stereotyping of our own tradition or that of others. Now, there's just a number of little points in actual engaging in the dialogue process. There's a wonderful resource called the Interfaith Peacebuilding Guide, formed by a group in the United States, United Religions Project. And it offers a number. It says, first, listen for understanding. That's good because we're going to be doing this shortly. Listen for understanding, not to agree or disagree with what's being said. And you don't have to agree with or believe what the other person is saying in order to understand them. By belief, I mean they accept that religious belief. You can honour what someone says without owning it. Act with respect. Many people in an interfaith setting understandably feel uncomfortable in sharing their most deeply held beliefs for fear of giving offence or being misunderstood. So treat what they share as an extension of themselves. Treat it with respect. And constantly consult with each other to see, whether or not you're treading on sensitive ground. Don't presume. This particularly pertains to shared rituals. And Venerable Wu Ping was very open and inclusive in introducing the walking meditation. It's a meditation that people of any faith could participate in. Relate your personal experiences and speak for yourself. Don't say, we think, we are, I think, I've experienced. Speak for yourself. We all know, what Muslims believe, or everyone says that Buddhists believe. What do you think? And express it in a way that's respectful to the other. In fact, a couple of those statements wouldn't be very helpful. Suspend assumptions, judgments, evaluations, titles and status. Notice when you feel surprised or upset or angry or affronted. Are you acting on false assumptions, or are you intimidated by the rank or the knowledge of the other, or are you starting to feel a little bit superior? Own how you feel, and then let it go and go back to listening to the other. Ask open-ended questions. Which question would you like? Why don't you Catholics, whatever? Or why don't people in your tradition do? Or please, can you tell me why people in your faith do this? Or could you tell me a little bit more about? Now, I don't know about you, but which two types of questions would you prefer? The first two or the second two? I know if I'm going to be responding, I would much prefer the second two. It's opening and engaging and allowing the other to speak without making judgment. Allow time for reflection. Pauses are fine in a conversation. Allow people time to collect their thoughts. In dialogue, you're looking for understanding, not solutions. Although hopefully dialogue will lead to solutions to things down the track. But in the actual dialogue, you're looking for understanding. What can we learn from each other? How can we touch heart to heart? And it's not an opportunity for conversion. Now, certainly dialogue can lead us to convert ourselves and our thinking, but it's not about converting other people to our way of thinking or to our religion. Definitely not. Great destructor of dialogue. I mean, I lost a friend many years ago who was insistent on continuing to try and convert me to her particular Christian tradition and was rather fearful of my eternal life because of the church I belonged to. And in the end, it was just too much. I just had to let it go, and we went our ways. I often wonder where she is now in her faith journey. And first of all, and finally, keep in mind who we are. We share a common humanity, and that is the first and most important point of common ground we share when we dialogue, and it's the first point we need to celebrate. And secondly, because we are human, we follow the golden rule. It's as though it's written in each of our hearts. Don't do to another what you would not like done to you. Don't speak to another in a way you would not like to be spoken to. Don't ignore or don't, in terms of listening, don't drift off and ignore the importance of what the other is sharing, because you wouldn't like that either. Don't do to others what you wouldn't like done to you, or do to others in a positive way. Do to others what you would like done to you. Keep those minutes. We're all part of the shared humanity. Now, got a little activity. I'm going to give you an opportunity to put some of those guidelines into practice. Now, in this case, we're going to do some dialogue, have an experience of dialogue if you wish to participate. Only say what you're comfortable with, no matter what others disclose. And if on hearing what I'm asking of you, you're feeling uncomfortable with the process, then it's fine. It's okay not to participate. It's okay. So what am I asking of you? We'll go back to what I said at the beginning about storytelling. I'd like you to share an experience or an event from your life story that has led you to be interested in interfaith dialogue. That's all. So I'd like you to share something of your life story that has led you in some way into interfaith dialogue, however obscure, however far back. So in a moment I'm going to pause just for a couple of minutes just to give you time to think about what you might say. Then when you've done that, like some tables have only got 3 or 4 people, and that's good. But if they're people that you know quite a lot about, you might like to sort of step outside your comfort zone and just join another table or another couple of people. So in groups of 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most. But if you're game, step outside your comfort zone and catch up with someone you don't know. First of all, it's probably important that you introduce yourselves if it's people you don't know. Maybe what faith you belong to, or none. And then tell that little story. Now, while you're telling, the others listen. They don't comment, they listen. And at the end, if someone has a question, then it's, can you tell me a little bit more about? We're not making judgments, that's what's being said, but can you tell me a little bit more about? If there's something that you'd like to know a little more about. Otherwise, just say, thanks very much, thank you. and then let the next person speak. And again, we listen. If there's something at the end, we'll ask the question. And eventually, when everyone's had a turn, if you still want, you can talk about anything else, but make it a conversation of dialogue where it's about sharing something of yourself, and the others are going to listen. So, I'll give you perhaps a minute just to sit and to think what you might say, and then I'll let you either move around or stay where you are, and then start the conversation. You can do it just one-on-one if you want to, with another person, if you want to choose someone you don't know, but see if you can connect with someone, at least one other person that you don't know, apart from the people you may know. So, all right, a minute now. Right, time flies when we're having fun and when we're dialoguing. It's almost, I wonder, just before we finish our conversations, I wonder if you could just quickly, amongst yourselves, or maybe even amongst the group, is there anything that you found you had in common with that led you this way, or or are you interested in the differences of your approaches that led you into a multi-faith dialogue? I'm not sure. If there's a mic around that people might like to share. Any individuals or groups like to share something? What did you find of interest? Was there any common points? Certainly at my table we had some lovely thoughts shared, and also some great humour as well. Well, that's okay. It's. I think that the process itself, I think, was wonderful. Just the buzz that was coming from everyone. Is anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to speak yet? Oh, you want to speak?
Am I on? Yes. I've been suddenly rushed into this. I've often heard this expression at these meetings and various other meetings around the place, all sorts of meetings, the expression, people of no faith, men of no faith. Well, I think that this is talking about a great multitude of non-entities, because I don't think such a person exists. I don't think there is such a person who has no faith. Atheists believe in rationality. That seems to be their main forte. Agnostics say, well, it's all too big for me. I don't understand this, who the creator is, or what on earth it is, or what these powers are that we don't understand. So I'm agnostic. I admit that I know nothing. So, as I say, I think people who are using this term, people of no faith, are talking about a great multitude of non-existent souls.
I think...
and should this terminology disappear from our dialogue?
I see exactly where you're coming from, because I've been an agnostic at one stage in my life. In fact, I was probably verging on atheism at one stage. And faith, I think when people have been using the term, they possibly mean people who do not belong to a particular religious faith tradition. But it probably do need another way of speaking about it. And it is important because I know we have faith in life. I mean, the common faith we're born with is faith in life. When we lose that faith, life loses meaning. So there's different ways of speaking of faith. I mean, all words are symbols. No matter what words we use, they're all symbols, and they mean different things to different people depending on their experience. And you're probably right, we need another term that's much more inclusive of people who do not belong to or follow a particular religious faith. I know when I was in my 20s, early 20s, I was in Russia, and I had a wonderful discussion with a number of us on this tour, camping tour in the wilds, rather primitive Russian campsites at the time. But we met a lovely group of young people. Some were pioneers, the communist youth movement, and some, I don't know whether they had a religious belief or not, but they were interested in trying out their English, and they were talking to us. But the most wonderful young people with deep values and real honesty, because one of the people, we got up and sort of went back to our campsite, came running behind us. One of the girls had left her handbag with passport, the works in it, and came running after to return it. There was a lot of foreign currency in that purse. Didn't even think to open it. They just came running behind to give it back to us. I mean, really wonderful young people. We had a wonderful discussion, and it was discussion more than a dialogue, because they were sort of debating with us about Western sorts of ideas. But at the same time, there was a dialogue undergoing. And these were wonderful, rich, good people. And to say that, that in the sense of no faith there, I think that they certainly had a faith in the goodness of life, in the goodness of other human beings. So it is something that we probably need to address. Yes. So thank you all for your patience and your willingness to participate. I'm sure many of you have already had much experience in interfaith dialogue, but I'm also positive that you've learnt something new today from those people with whom you were dialoguing. And I'd just like to finish with a little a prayer, universal prayer for peace, that was written, it's adapted by Satish Kumar, who was a Jain monk, or used to be a Jain monk. He adapted it from a mantra that came from the Upanishads. And I belong to an interfaith meditation group. We meet on a Tuesday, and it's great to see some of the members of that group here today, from all different sorts of religious backgrounds and traditions. And this prayer says, "Lead me from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead me from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead me from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our heart, our world, our universe. Peace." So thank you.